This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Salazar Center for North American Conservation. The episode scratches the surface of some of the topics that will be covered in greater depth at the Salazar Center's 4th Annual International Symposium on Conservation Impact, which will be held next week, the week of October 3rd, 2022, in Denver and online. The symposium will explore how conservation efforts that span boundaries like the U.S.-Mexico border can drive binational cooperation, as well as better outcomes for people and nature. An all-star lineup of conservation researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and funders will highlight opportunities for and barriers to conservation in the border region, climate change impacts, the role of indigenous leadership, and learnings from the region's distinct history and biogeography. Check out the episode notes in your podcast player for a link to the website and for a discount code to receive $25 off the symposium registration. Thanks so much. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation, or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Francesca Claverie. Francesca is the Native Plant Program Manager at the Borderlands Restoration Network. Based in the southern Arizona town of Patagonia, the Borderlands Restoration Network's mission is to grow a restorative economy by building healthy ecosystems, restoring habitat for plants and wildlife, and reconnecting our border communities to the land through shared learning. Through binational partnerships and community-led innovation, Francesca and her team are making progress towards solving many border-specific conservation challenges that are often not very well known to those of us living far from the border. We could easily spend 5 or 6 hours discussing Francesca's various conservation projects, but for this hour-long conversation, we zoned in on one particularly innovative project that spans the U.S.-Mexico border, called Bacanora for Bats, Binational Conservation and Sustainable Agave Spirits. The project is focused on conserving agave plants that are a critical food source for specific migrating bat populations, and are simultaneously under a great deal of pressure because of the booming tequila and Bacanora industries. As you'll hear her explain, Francesca and her team have implemented a one-of-a-kind system that allows for continued economic prosperity from agave production, but not at the expense of the bat populations. It's a perfect example of a community-driven, win-win conservation solution. About 2 years ago, the project was awarded the Salazar Center's Connectivity Challenge Prize, a $100,000 award that Francesca and her binational team have used to implement this innovative conservation solution. So we obviously talk about how those funds have been put to use and some of the successes that have resulted from the prize. We also discuss some of the unexpected challenges and opportunities that have arisen during the project, and how changing political administrations on both sides of the border have affected her work. We go into great detail about bats, the ecology of agave plants, and specific challenges that come with working across borders. Francesca has also had a fascinating personal and professional trajectory, so we talk about her childhood spent on the California-Mexico border and why she decided to pursue conservation as a career. She also offers up some excellent book recommendations and some wise parting words. I was so inspired by Francesca and her work along the border, and I believe there are lessons in this conversation that can be applied by anyone working in the conservation sector. Thanks so much to Francesca for taking the time to chat, and thank you for listening. Hope you enjoy. First of all, Francesca, thank you so much for joining me. As we were talking about before we started recording, I've kind of gone down this rabbit hole of all the cool work that you and your organization are doing down in your area of the country, and I've just been blown away by it. And so I'm so excited to get the chance to chat with you. And maybe for folks who are not all that familiar with the Borderlands Restoration Network, could you start out just by talking about the organization, maybe the history of the organization, what you guys do?
Yeah, definitely. So for Borderlands Restoration Network, I manage the native plant program of the project, but we have three different departments. We have a watershed restoration team, and this group focuses mainly with erosion, on the ground erosion control structures, building rock structures, slowing down rainwater as it hits the landscape, and really giving it time to soak in and eventually be able to connect surface water flows with underground water flows and bring back some of these perennial streams that we've lost over the last century, mostly as a result of heavy overgrazing that happened about 100 years ago. Then we come in with the native plants and seeds that my department works on, which we collect regionally from the area. We've worked with a little bit over 700 different species of native plants and are able to then seed those into the rock structures so that the plants can physically hold the water towards the surface, and then which also promotes all kinds of biodiversity added to eroded landscapes. And then our third department is the educational programs. And this is work that's just critical to keep the on-the-ground restoration running, but it involves so many different projects, from paying high school students here in the rural borderlands to do some of this work when they have time off in the summer, keep them involved, but also help this concept of the restoration economy, of giving locals job opportunities that aren't just in extractive industries, but can be part of restoration and ecological work. And then we also do a lot of cross-border work with our education, which is partnering with and also providing resources and fiscal sponsorship for our partners in Mexico to also do some of this work, but also the projects that they're really excited about. Because in this neck of the woods, there is this wall that divides us in these political boundaries. But like as you live here and as you go across the border, it's the same landscape. Like we're both just in the exact same landscape. And this project has been around. I've been working here for 10 years. It's about 12 years old. And it's this really cool project that was founded by Dr. Ron Polium, who still works with us as a founder and a volunteer. He's still on the board. And he was just an amazing theoretical ecologist. And he had been at the University of Georgia for many years. He had worked at the University of Arizona in the 70s and always loved this part of the world. And when he retired, he came back and saw so much of the erosion that was continuing to happen, so many streams that were no longer perennial. And so what he wanted to do in his retirement was preserve wildlife corridors and start organizations that could use a lot of the theoretical ecology models and the research that was happening, but that was really applied and really a nonprofit that got people on the ground and did work on the ground and the landscape.
Yeah, well, I love digging into the website because I feel like you and I could sit here and we could talk for probably like 10 hours about everything y'all do. Because the more I dug into it, the more complex and interesting it got. And so we might need to go ahead and schedule like a part 2 or 3 for this because we got a lot to discuss. But for the purpose of this interview, we were introduced by the Salazar Center for North American Conservation because you pitched a project. It was almost exactly 2 years ago by looking at the date on the YouTube video, related to agave plants and bats and pollination. And I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that project because you eventually won the $100,000 prize. And so I thought maybe that specific project would be a great way just to kind of dig into some of the important, an example of the work you're doing. So when did you guys decide that you were going to apply for the $100,000 award?
So we found it was the inaugural launch of the Connectivity Challenge Award through the Salazar Center. And it just fit this project that we already had going perfectly. I was shocked. I saw the proposal, and we've been working with growing agaves for migrating nectar feeding bats with a ton of different partners since about 2015. And we've had this project in many different iterations. And we were really seeking funding to help our Mexico partners with a policy component of conserving agaves for bats. And this request for proposals came up, and it was like, oh my gosh, it's perfect. It's looking for projects that can combine conservation with policy, specifically a policy integral approach to like making sure that the plants are being grown. We're already doing on the ground work. We're doing the mapping. And then it's so tricky. I mean, working with policy is tricky enough. Binational policy is extra tricky. And so we kind of, just saw this, and it worked perfectly for combining all of these needs that the project had at that moment. And we finished up the second year. The project's still going strong. It probably would not have continued, especially the Mexico component, without this funding, which was really, really special.
Yeah, when I was watching your pitch video on YouTube, which I'll put in the episode notes so people can watch it, but it did seem like it was really just a perfect project for what the Salazar Center was looking for. Could you just lay out the issue for folks? Because it was a new issue to me. And like we were saying before we started recording, like I'm pretty dialed into a lot of different issues. I enjoy reading about it, but this was something that I had not heard of. So could you just give an overview of the challenge that has been going on with the agave and the bats and the pollination?
Definitely. So anytime we start a project, like in general, our job is to restore native plants to the landscape. So often that's not appealing to the public. It's like, oh yeah, a plant that will help a random little spider or, a random mite somewhere. No one really cares. And whenever you can do a project that can highlight some, like a really critical factor that's happening ecologically, but also a really charismatic species, it's just ideal for getting the word out there and also describing an issue through the perfect examples of, in this case, agaves and bats. This has been our favorite project that we've had the opportunity to work with, and we'll probably continue to work on this as long as we have a nursery and collect seed. So the main issue in the story of this incredible Agave for Bats program is twofold, in that both agaves are really noticeable. They're the sexy heritage plant of Mexico. Everyone in Mexico knows what an agave is, and they're heavily associated with tequila, but also with fiber and with all kinds of really important ecological functions. Mm-hmm. You then have bats, which are very mysterious. I did not know very much about bats before we started this agave project. We don't even really learn about them very much in school or even in college, unless you're taking a specific like bat biology or mammal class. They actually make up a quarter of all mammal species are different types of bats. So bat diversity in the world is just massive. Mm-hmm. And they come out at night. So they're very, very mysterious. And often people don't realize what their native bats are, who their native bats are in the region, and are kind of like freaked out or scared of them. And there's so much cool work going on with bat advocacy. Here in Arizona, we have around 40 different species of bats. Most of those bats and most of the bats in the world are insect-feeding bats. Yeah. And then here in Arizona, we have 2 species that are nectar-feeding bats. And so that means these are bats, they'll eat a little bit of insects here and there, but they mostly rely on nectar from plants. And the one species that has been on the endangered species list and then was delisted earlier this decade is the lesser long-nosed bat, Leptodicterus yerbabuene. And this is a really cute, charismatic bat. It has like a face of a little chihuahua. It looks like a tiny puppy. Some bats get like funky faces. This one is just adorable. And they live in these big colonies, and they're like very twitchy. They're like hopped up on sugar. Mm-hmm. And the really epic part of this story is that they're migrating. So they don't live in Arizona year round. And they come from Oaxaca in central southern Mexico all the way up the coast, and they're heading to Tucson. And it's not all of the bats. it's mostly the pregnant female bats that come up. And you think like, well, why would you go to Tucson in May?
Yeah.
Everyone's leaving Tucson in May.
Uh-huh.
And these bats are coming up from Mexico and they're hitting the big saguaro blooms. You have the iconic desert columnar saguaro cactus flowering in May and June.
Okay.
And they're coming up and they hit all these little columnar cactus on the way up. They hug the West Coast. And they have these maternity roosts all over southern Arizona where they live in by the thousands. And they come out every night and they hit these saguaro plants. Well, after the saguaro plants dry up and they've had their little babies, and this is also something that I think is so endearing and like kind of traumatic if you're a woman and you think about it. But these bats, when they have their little pups, they call them pups.
I didn't know that. I had no idea they called them pups.
Yeah, and funnily enough, agave babies, the little clones that come off agaves, are also called pups.
Oh, wow.
So it's like this cute little the bat babies and the agave babies. So these bat colonies, one reason conservation is important for them is that you see bats and you see the colonies and people are kind of like, rats of the sky. Like, what are these guys? But unlike cats or dogs or rodents that have multiple litters of babies every year, a female bat only has one pup a year. And that pup, when it's born, takes up 30% of her body weight, which is obscene. Like kind of, if you're like a 100-pound woman, that's like birthing a 30-pound infant, which is just too much.
And having to fly while you do it.
Yeah, and they're like, their little babies will like hold on to, it's so bizarre and so cute. And they're doing this huge migration. And then once they're lactating, they have their cute little pups and they're starting to make the return trip back. That's when they start to depend on the flowering agaves all throughout the corridor. And they hit these mountains up where we are in Patagonia. It's like late August, September time. And that's when our agaves are flowering. And they think there's an amino acid that they're interested in that helps with lactation. They're not exactly sure, but they're making this huge trip. Most of the males stay south and they make this huge trip up with, pregnant and then with their babies for this important resource for them. And then the whole time that they're going south, they're depending on these flowering agaves. Well, unfortunately for the bats, humans are also very, very interested in agave plants and in the nectar that agaves produce. Agave syrup is a huge health food alternative to regular sugar. The whole booze industry around mezcal, tequila, and then Bacanora, which is the regional mezcal of Sonora, has just really blown up. And unfortunately, because agaves are monocarpic, they only bloom once and then they die. So this drought-tolerant agave plant is saving all its energy in the base of the plant to one day flower. And many of these species, they only flower at night. They release the nectar at night. So they're really looking for these bats to be able to pollinate them. And if you can't do both, you can't feed a bat and turn the sugar into booze because it's the same source. Yep. So people have to cut them down before they flower, and that's what you're distilling. There's so much demand in the U.S. There's so much demand in Europe for these really niche, amazing alcohols that have been around for hundreds, if not, some people think thousands of years. In some cases, some distillation archaeologic work goes back really, really far in Mexico history. But just really important cultural traditional drink that people are trying to make money off of. And that's part of the economy. That's a whole thing. But if all those agaves are cut down, there won't be food for the bats. This bat was just taken off the endangered species list. It's a really important issue as we destroy habitat for like the cutest bats ever.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I've ever been a huge fan of bats, but you make them sound very, very cute. Like I want to see one now.
You should look them up. They have very, very sweet little faces.
I'll have links on the webpage so people can click through and see what these little guys look like. So, I would guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, that as the tequila business or, different businesses that are associated with agave have grown, it's been good for the local economy, but then it's causing these issues for bats. How did you guys learn that this was creating an issue with bat? Did the local community come to you? Because I would guess that a lot of people are pretty excited about the economic benefits of this, but how did it come clear to you that there was this pollination issue that needed to be dealt with in one way or another?
We got into this project kind of in an interesting way. In 2013, we started growing agave palmeri from seed for a border restoration project with the Park Service at the Coronado Historical Park. And this was a wall reconstruction, like a Obama-era wall restoration project where they had ripped out all these agaves and the park wanted these exact agaves grown out. So we grew out like 10,000 agaves and used some of them for the project. And then we're like, shoot, what do we do with all these agaves? We kind of need, something for them. And it was actually Bat Conservation International who came to us, and they've been the best partners. And they're the ones that have taught me everything I know about bats. And they just have a wealth of knowledge. They have a awesome little magazine. It's like a subscription service, and there's so many different bats and so many projects. But they were dealing with the backlash at that point of people being really upset that they had taken, like they didn't do it, but that in the bat community, the nectar-eating bats were off the endangered species list. And so they were looking for projects, and they were like, well, we should grow like 1 million agaves. So their project manager had called us and said, hey, we heard you have some of these native agaves. How many do you have? And I said, well, we have like 3,000 available now of this plant. It would be great to use them. And they said, oh, we're looking for like 1 million. We'll keep looking. And then they called back and we're like, oh my gosh, no one, we need to get these growing. No one really grows this wild agave species. And so since then, they've partnered with a ton of different nurseries in the region, like Gila Watershed Partnership, and Steve Plath is an incredible agave grower. We've grown out thousands of agaves for them. And because our work is binational, we already had some partners in Mexico, and specifically some incredible partners that were young biologists that were recently graduated from the University of Sonora in Hermosillo. They just have a really good program there. And I said, we have to stop thinking about this as like, oh, we'll just save all the bats by planting agaves here, when the real issue with them being deforested is in Mexico. And let's get our partners involved, because they definitely care and they need funding all the time. And they have the contacts to be able to do outreach. And through talking to our friends, Valeria and Leah, they had just founded this organization called the Colectivo Sonora Silvestre. They just got on it and they planted thousands of agaves and went straight to Bacanora producers and went straight to the government. And to this day, people will go, they'll ask Valeria or they'll ask Leah, and they'll be like, you girls were like 23, 24. What makes you think you can just start a project like this? Like, what made you think you could just get the government involved? And they were like, well, no one's ever gone to the government before. And they were really interested and really curious and totally on board, because on their end, the Mexican producers and the Mexican officials, they want to make sure that they can continue to grow Bacanora into the future. At the rate it's going, all of these plants are getting wild harvested. They're making a switch to plantation style. And with that, it's like, well, if you want to continue to grow them, you should let some flower. You can then collect seed from them. Then the bats are happy. And so that was kind of the pitch that we were making, and that Valeria and Leah from the Colectivo were really able to make happen through their connections they're just like incredible force of will and energy. And to this day, I'm just so impressed with the projects that those girls have going. They've hired, a huge network of people to help. They go to conferences and they go directly to talk to the little ranchos, and they're like hanging out with, drinking coffee with these guys. And one of my favorite conversations, we've been able to go down a few times and help support and do some propagation support for them. And we did one of these big presentations about how important the bats were and blah, blah, blah for pollination. And this one older lady, she raised her hand and she goes, "We don't want bats. They eat our cows." And I was like, wait, the bats eat your cows? And I thought about it. And then I was like, oh my God, Francesca, you're so ignorant. They have vampire bats in Mexico.
Oh, yeah.
I completely forgot about vampire bats. And then was like, oh my God, you're totally right. I'm so sorry we didn't lead with that to like help that there are so many different species. And then I was just blown away where I was like, holy moly, that's right. They have vampire bats that they're not like eating the cows, but they're definitely drinking their blood and spreading some diseases. But it's just been fascinating. Like, you always, I don't know, sometimes you feel like, oh yeah, we're going to really tell these people what's up. And then they're like, dude, we have vampire bats here. This stresses us out. It's like, oh yeah, totally.
Yeah. That's one of the things when I was reading up on the project, I felt like you guys made it clear that you've been very, very focused on making it a locally driven project. It's not like y'all had some idea and then you go to everybody and you're like, this is what you're going to do. It's been more of a community building process and really getting the input of the local communities. And I think that's so cool. One other question about the grant that you won from the Salazar Center. There's a certification process that you guys are proposing. Is that correct? And if so, can you talk about that?
Definitely. So one of the ways that we're trying to make this project adoptable and feasible is one of the colectivo's efforts is, it's like the acronym is FOBADES, and it's a certification program in conjunction with the denomination of origin for Bacanora. And there's a lot of politics with that too, throughout the world with denominations of origin. So DOs are like, how champagne is only from the Champagne region in France.
Yep.
You can't call sparkling wine from the U.S. champagne anymore, even though we have this association with it. It's the same with tequila, same with mezcal, same with Bacanora. But Bacanora is still very small. It's not trying to influence tequila policy change is $1 billion-something industry. Bacanora is still fairly small. And so being able to go to both the government that regulates the denomination and the producers to say, okay, we want to make sure that we can grow these plants on an agricultural scale. That means if it's going to be friendly for bats, what should we do? What are the rules? And at this point, there's a 2% requirement to let 2% of the agaves flower every year, which you then can collect seed from, to make sure that either the whole plantation, but especially the ones that you've set aside for flowering, are done, are produced organically. So you're not putting, there's an agave weevil that's pretty dangerous for agave plants in plantations. And often the plants are sprayed very heavily, which if you're a nectar feeding bat or any pollinator is really dangerous, the way systemic pesticides work. So the colectivo goes in, they identify which plants are going to flower, and then they also put out like these organic weevil traps to trap them outside of the agaves, which is so cool. So cool. And then with this idea of like, okay, you're letting agaves flower for bats, you're making sure that they're organic, they're not poisoned agaves. And then you have a brand now where you're part of the certification where this is something that should help you sell your product, to get a higher price for your product. The way that there's a small list of bat-friendly tequilas with the Tequila Interchange Project. That's the idea with this, is like there's a list right now of the producers in Sonora who are following these rules, who are adopting these practices. And so that's kind of the list, is like, don't cut them all down, let some of them flower, make sure they're not poisoned. And your incentive is that you're allowing yourself to continue to produce the plants, but also consumers, for the most part, want to feel like everything they're consuming isn't completely killing the planet.
Yeah. And so when I hear that, I'm like, that makes perfect sense. But in my previous work, I used to work with a lot of farmers around Pueblo, Colorado, where they grow the Pueblo chili, and a group of the farmers, kind of forward thinking, really, smart farmers, started the Pueblo Chili Growers Association so that they could kind of pool resources, get higher prices, really just find these win-win solutions to really sell more chili. But there were always a few holdouts, people that didn't want to join for one reason or another. How have the farmers or the local farmers there, have they been excited to join, or has there been any pushback? Has there been any unexpected challenges that you've come across of getting people to grow the agave according to the certification?
For the most part, the actual producers who have land, like their own land that they're collecting agaves from, are super on board and are really excited because they feel supported and their families have been doing this for hundreds of years.
Sure.
So they're like, yeah, we also don't want to run out of agave. They're like, yeah, that's cute about the bat, whatever. But they're like, yeah, very, very neat. The bigger problem has been with the brands that are already completely wild harvested, where they're paying people to get like a collection permit, and they just go collect wild agaves on public lands or different places, but it's like not their land that they're collecting the agaves from. Mm-hmm. Because for them, there's no real incentive. They're like, well, we already aren't going to do an agricultural thing. Why would, how are we even going to really participate in this? And then some of the other the main issues is that Bacanora is already highly political, as they've decided where in Sonora you can technically produce the denomination of origin, like real Bacanora.
Okay.
So there's a lot of distraction. Like our policies have been adopted into the actual denomination of origin, where the colectivo is part of a committee that's working with the government. But then there's all this distraction around, oh, well, this person wants the whole state to be in the DO. And then the people in the mountains that have been doing it for a long time don't want that to happen. So it's like there's so much infighting already with the politics of who gets to call it Bacanora, people feeling left out because their families have been doing it for hundreds of years, but they're not in the area and they're not recognized. So that, to me, as someone that's just, cares so much about the ecological conservation end of it, I'm like, oh my God, the politics of, but that's the reality. That's how life works. The other really cool thing about this project and the way that the colectivo decided to work with the Sonoran government that's very interesting is, for the most part, all of the certifications, because there's other really cool projects happening in Mexico for mezcal and for tequila, but they're all private industry driven. Yeah. So this one is with the public through the government. And a lot of people have been like, oh my God, how can you even work with the government? But as you see with even the private industry one, there aren't like raging success stories with any of the certifications. And that's like a big process of like, it's just a ton of work.
Yes.
And whether you're dealing with private industry and you're negotiating with the brands and you have a brand ambassador that is trying to make this work on behalf of a nonprofit that's doing the work, or you're doing it directly through the government, I think both are really important solutions. But it is cool to have like some diversity in that, where you have, let's try it through the government. Let's try it through private industry. The bottom line is we need to work on this and put effort into it, because it's a lot of work, and, see which model works out the best and maybe come up with some new ones also. But that was something important to us, is keeping the certification simple and straightforward, or else no one would adopt it. If we were like, oh, you have to have 50% of your field flower every year, well, that's just not feasible. Mm-hmm. And no one's going to do that. And if you only have like 2 people certified at the end of the day, well, is it better to have 50 producers certified or like 2 certified. So overall, we're still happy with the going through the government, and they've been really supportive, which is really nice and somewhat unexpected because they have other things to deal with. But I think they were just really happy to be included in the conversation and feel like, oh yeah, this is something we should care about, instead of it coming through, if you don't go through channels to make people feel respected and feel like, oh yeah, we want to go through these institutions that already exist. Sometimes then people really don't want you involved because they think you're just coming through and telling everyone what to do.
Yeah. Well, it seems like you're operating at this really cool sweet spot of conservation and economic growth, because like you mentioned, some people don't really care about the bats, and some people only care about the bats, and then some people just want to make more money. And it seems like if you think about it like one of those Venn diagrams from high school or college or whatever, you're right in that sweet spot where you can kind of catch people's attention either way. So in addition to the certification, so you won the $100,000. How else have you been putting that money to work? Can you just kind of give an update, over the last 2 years, everything you've been working on?
Definitely. So half of the money went to the Colectivo group to keep their projects going, working with Bacanora producers and the denomination of origin. On this side of the border, the last 2 years of work has been in mapping and in this idea of having baseline numbers for agaves. We know for a fact that agave numbers are dropping. We know they're dropping a little bit in the US, but maybe not. For sure in Mexico. We're getting to a point in Mexico where we might not see any more wild agaves, especially of like angustifolia and palmeri, those 2 species, since they're the most heavily poached species in the state for Bacanora. But what we really wanted to do was get suitability maps done and do some surveys of specific areas that had agaves that, like, we already know have pretty decent agave populations, to be able to have a kind of baseline done, to be able to say, like, 5-10 years from now, if we just keep going, oh yeah, agave numbers are dwindling, we see less and less. Well, if you don't actually have any current mapping or any survey numbers done, how can you really say that?
Yep.
So we partnered with a researcher at the University of Arizona, Erin Rorden, who does beautiful maps. And we got teams of volunteers and staff together to go out and find agaves and write down where they were and say how many there were. And that part has been really fun. And we kind of kept this project separate from the outplanting. We have a lot of ongoing outplanting projects with Bat Conservation International and others, but we kept this project kind of more map and policy based around the project, instead of going, oh, we're going to plant 500 agaves, or we're going to plant. It's like we're already kind of doing that. And then this was more outreach, education, getting the certification done, and getting our baseline numbers done so that we actually can say how agaves are doing, especially in our area where we have a lot of cool agaves.
Have there been any big surprises? Because I would imagine when you were pitching this idea, you had some ideas, you and your team had some ideas about, all right, this is what we think is going to happen. This is the hypothesis. Have there been any good or bad surprises that have popped up over the past 2 years?
For us, all the good stuff has been the incredible amount of support and excited people and new partners that we've encountered through this project. I was so happy to apply for this. I was so thrilled when the project won. What I didn't realize was how much more visibility, like even this podcast, where it was just a real method for us to be able to talk about the work and get people excited, where they're like, we're going to do grow outs at my place in New Mexico. And it's like, hell yeah. Do you need help with seed? Do you need help with growing? Like, let us know. We'll tell you what we do. It's just been such a great way. Because like Borderlands Restoration Network isn't going to solve the problem of bats and agaves. We need everyone to participate and be excited. And that's how you do it, is through telling people about it. Our biggest setback with the project was the state election in Sonora, where they switched over the entire state government what was it, 6 or 9 months into our project.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like, oh no, we just like had a huge panic. And because we'd been working with people for years and things had started to move really quickly. We were like, oh yeah, this is going to happen. No problem. It switched over and we just had this huge panic moment. And then it turns out the new government is also really stoked on sustainability certifications and have also been really supportive. But it's like that kind of political timeline when the government switch over. And in Mexico, it happened. It's like the same, I guess, in the U.S. when like one president leaves and you bring all your people. In the state election, they like wiped the board of people we'd been working with for the Bacanora, and it was all new people. So we got a new agreement signed with them. We were able to like get things back on track, but that was definitely the like, oh yeah, the politics of the policy.
Yeah.
It's always the tricky part. And yeah, for whatever reason, we were like, well, they probably won't switch out these guys. And it was like, oh no, they did. They fired everyone. So that was one of our biggest setback.
Along those lines, just broader question, how have the last 2 years been different for you and your ability to do your work with the Biden administration versus Trump administration?
Overall, it's been positive. There was a big sigh of relief with most of our government partners about knowing like, oh yeah, we can use words again like climate change and biodiversity. Before, we had to switch a lot of language in federal grants to be like fire hazard. It's just funny how you have to move language around. Something we were really looking forward to was halting of border wall construction, because that's something that border wall construction has been ongoing for so many so many administrations. Trump has definitely been the most vocal and the most active in doing the most for putting up walls in areas that feasibly just can't handle or even it just doesn't make sense to put walls in some of these areas. So the projects end up being really, really expensive and kind of just damaging. And we really were like, oh my gosh, Biden's getting in. That's something they'll be able to stop, is a lot of this construction that, an area we've done some work, and we had talked about it a little briefly before we started, but was in the Altar Valley. And There is this epic area there where they just like blew up a few miles of the mountain. And it's like this nasty, nasty scar. But you're just looking at it and you're like, oh my God, like why? And it just seems so futile. We're like right next to it. Anything could just kind of walk around.
Sure.
It's not even like useful. It's not practical. It's so expensive. And so we were kind of stoked with Biden coming in. And then we actually just found out a few weeks ago that some of the wall construction is going to continue in the area. And that was a little bit disheartening. So overall, great news in terms of like some great funding for biodiversity projects, for a lot of those large landscape grants that we depend on a lot to keep our work going. But on the wall front, as of just recently, I really thought that a lot of that would just kind of stop for a moment.
Yeah.
But I don't know. And I don't know if it's like contracts that still need to be honored through the bidding, the construction companies that did the bidding. But there's so much damage with the wall. There's the obvious things you think about, but even the water use. And when I first thought about that, I'm like, why would they use so much water? And it's like, oh, all the cement. Mm-hmm. They don't like truck in water. They're like drilling wells all over the place to be able to produce enough cement to keep these walls up. So it's damaging on so many different levels. And these are just really remote areas that are really hard to even work in, and then in the end really expensive to put something like that up in.
Oh sure. I hadn't even thought about the water aspect with the concrete. I mean, that's Yeah, it's the whole thing is wild. But you don't strike me as the type who's gonna let anything like that get you down for too long. That's what I've heard. You get stuff done.
Yeah, I grew up on the border. I've at this point, it's shocking to me to see photos of like my grandparents hanging out on the border and how little walls there were then, and my great grandparents hanging out, and how like there was basically like a little kiosk where you'd like ask for good places to eat. That was like
Really?
the border. You'd go up to the border and be like, are there any good like Chinese restaurants? And they'd be like, oh yeah, there's a good one down here. Have fun. There was no like police state around it. And now like for us driving through checkpoints, it's just normal where like, you know, you could have any border patrol person come into your home at any point because you're just in that area and there's like nothing you can do. And in some ways it's like, I have the things I love to do around restoration. We're going to keep doing those. We're going to keep partnering with our friends and amazing partners in Mexico. I do hope that over time, it's a little bit disheartening to see how complacent even I am with some of these changes that are like incremental police state type changes around the work we're doing, where you just don't even really notice. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I have to pay to have an extra Sentry card just so that I don't have to wait in line for 4 hours. And I'm like really happy to get it, where I'm like, oh, thank God I can get a Sentry card so I can go in the fast lane. But yeah, it's so interesting how all of that works and how incremental it is.
Yeah, when I was down there just before the pandemic, I was on a private ranch in the Altar Valley, and I was so surprised by how the Border Patrol vehicles, they have keys to all the gates and they drive around. And, you know, I'm not saying right or wrong one way or the other, but to me, you know, where most of my experience has been in Colorado, Montana, Idaho, it would be quite everybody be up in arms if the federal government just had keys to your gates and would just come in and drive around at their will. It was a really interesting and eye-opening experience that I'm really glad I had, because it makes me more qualified to talk with you about this stuff, because I didn't fully understand it. You just hit on this a second ago, but talking about your grandparents, I'd love to hear where you grew up and how you were drawn to doing this conservation work, because it sounds like you've got a really interesting backstory.
Yeah, I'm originally from Calexico, California, which is an hour west of Yuma. It's a border city. So Calexico's on the U.S. side and Mexicali's on the Mexican side. And it's like aerially, it's like one city. The Mexican side, Mexicali, is like huge. It's like the state capital of Baja. There's a few million people. There's industry and art and culture and great restaurants. And the U.S. side is very agro-industrial. Mm-hmm. My dad's family moved there in the late 1800s to farm. And my mom's family moved there. Well, they're Mexican. Their side's Mexican, but they came through the government. My great-grandfather was a politician and then got kicked out during the Mexican Revolution.
Oh, wow.
And then went back. Yeah, and then went back. So that's how her family came to the U.S. side, was like amnesty after getting kicked out. He was the governor. And then he went back and became a senator in the 60s, in the 1960s. So the family's like been on that border and for, I don't know, over 100 years or so. And my parents are still there. My dad's a farmer. My brother is a hay broker and sells hay all over the place, all over the world, and also does a little bit of farming. And our family's just always been very entwined with the border. My mom wanted to make sure that my brother and I spoke Spanish. So every day for 6 years, we walked across the border every day to go to school. She sent us to school in Mexico.
Oh, wow. Cool. And
it was, a really great experience, a little intense, because coming from the U.S. side, it's kind of appalling, like how much privilege you can have, and just being just slightly north of somewhere mm-hmm. else and having like a line drawn in the sand and what that can mean politically. And it's something that, I don't know, I'm a very practical person, but I also, at the time when I was a little kid, it didn't make a lot of sense like why I had friends that couldn't come visit me at my house, but I could go visit them at their house. And it's those little things as kids where it's like, it's still just not right. It's not a good thing if you think about it at all for any length of time. We're used to it. We get complacent. That's okay. That's human because we go about our lives. We do our thing. But that's something that has definitely stuck with me where I love the conservation work. I love plants, and I lived and worked at UC Davis for I don't know, 8 years or so. And I loved it up there, but I was really happy to be able to come back and work for Borderlands Restoration, where I'm back on the border and get to have conversations and do work that directly affects both border relation, but also just community, and encouraging people to like work more in Mexico. And in our case, make sure that we're funding projects in Mexico, because it's easy for everyone to go, oh, well, that's Mexico's problem. But if you look at policy history, if you look at so many things over the last hundreds of years since we've had these countries going, it is our problem too. And we really should, as the wealthier country by far, put resources into supporting our shared ecology and into doing this work as we've extracted and continue to extract so much from Mexico. And even just like rates, it's weird to live just north of a line. And for everything you do, whether it's being a mechanic or a laborer or working in conservation, you just immediately get paid 20 times more than your buddy who works in Mexico as like a professor, as anything. And to me, that's just obscene. It's just, it's so bizarre. And we're going to continue to extract so much from people south of us when you have those kinds of disparities. Instead of like, oh, how can we work together? How can we, partner on making these things better? Also, if you look at like biodiversity and conservation, and Mexico has like the most incredible ecosystems in the world.
Yeah.
It's just being able to like have certain plants here in the Sky Island regions of Arizona and be able to head, 20 miles south, and you're like, oh my gosh, they have even more endemic plants. Like, it's so amazing. And you want those to be conserved, and you want those to be taken care of. And as practitioners in the U.S., that's something we should put effort into, is helping to fund those projects. And that's something I really appreciate the Salazar Center for, is they fund some really cool border projects. And that's part of their mission, is to like keep that communication going and to keep these projects all along the U.S.-Mexico border going, which I think is just critical, and it's hard to find funding for.
Yeah, I think the Salazar Center is just so forward thinking. It almost seems like they're 2 or 3 steps ahead of what kind of the standard conservation world is doing, which I really appreciate. And selfishly, they introduced me to people like you, and I get to have these conversations, so I like them even more for that. So you're obviously working hard on this, on a bunch of projects, but this one we've talked about with the bats and the agave. What other projects along the border are you excited about, whether it's projects that you're directly involved in or maybe that you've observed from afar, but maybe some conservation opportunities that somebody like me sitting in Colorado may not be aware of, things that are getting you excited about the future, and you see, there could be, ripple effects that positive ripple effects that go out, beyond for years and years. Right
now, one of the projects that I'm working on trying to find funding for, but something that I just see as like this cultural phenomena, is native plants in Mexico and native plant nurseries in Mexico. It's fascinating being in the U.S. side, where every day I do education with people and talk to people about native plants. And there's still a divide. There's so many people that know why native plants are important, but there's still so much work to do with explaining like why you should have this in your backyard, why, we shouldn't bulldoze this area to put a new house, but try and work around it and keep the ecosystem intact. In Mexico, everyone is automatically a better gardener. It's so funny. These like little old ladies have been like gardening nonstop, and it's something they like teach. Everyone's good with growing plants, and you give plants to each other, you share plants. There's a few nurseries, but for the most part, people are like sharing cuttings and just really good. There's also an innate bias towards native plants because they're considered like, those ugly mountain plants. Like, it's just like where the ranches are, and we want like orange trees and pretty ornamental plants. Well, that is starting to shift really rapidly as young people in Mexico who are so educated, this like very educated generation, are getting really excited about the natural world and biodiversity. And we are constantly giving classes in Mexico, either online or in person, right across the border, where there's so many young people that are like ready to have native plant nurseries.
Yep.
And that's something I think is so cool, not just for like people's homes and gardens, but for restoration in Mexico. We've been asked so many times, like, oh, you're on the border. Can you get some permits and like ship some of your plants to Mexico and some of your seed to Mexico? We have a project. And it's like, no, you should be using like Mexican producers. Like, don't pay us to send plants to Mexico. Everyone in Mexico knows how to grow plants. Like, support those producers, and especially some of these young people. And so as a big plant nerd, that's something I'm really excited about, is just being like, oh my God, we're getting like photos emailed to us and questions from people trying to grow different species, or then like sending us, and these are like little backyard nurseries. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to get something set up to be able to fund people both for like projects, but also, for both Borderlands work, but also some of the other amazing conservation groups here in the Borderlands, like Sky on the Lions and Watershed Management Group, when they do projects in Mexico, to like be networked with some of these producers to get sustainably sourced native plants for their projects and seed for their projects. That's where I'm at from a hardcore plant nerd perspective.
I love that. And I'm trying to be a plant nerd. And I just went, I had my girls, I got two little girls, and we were camping, and one of them asked me a question about a tree, and I didn't know the answer, and I was super embarrassed. So I've been buying a bunch of tree books and flower books. And so I love asking people book questions. Do you have any good book recommendations? They could be about plants. I would appreciate personally if they were books about plants, but what books have played an important role in your kind of development as a conservationist and as a leader and just as a all-around interesting person?
My two favorite books that are both plant related but are a little bit more philosophical around conservation. The first one that was a huge impact on my whole trajectory to even doing this work was Kat Anderson's Tending the Wild, which is about California Indian ecological techniques. And she was one of the first people who, when I read this book, it kind of separated this very like white American conservation notion of you build a fence and you keep nature out and we don't really mess with it. If you leave it alone, it'll just stay fine. And she just really talked about how historically people are part of the landscape, and burning is natural, and pruning trees and supporting biodiversity through using plants and keeping an eye on plants and taking care of plants is something I just think is so, so cool. And it's something that we think about all the time as we're assessing the health of plant populations. It's like, well, shoot, maybe we should irrigate some of these little oak seedlings. People were probably kind of taking care of them a little more in the wild than we think. And there's so many questions around like, why are these populations declining? It's so weird. And it's like, well, is it just climate change, or have people also stopped taking care of the wilderness and being a part of the wilderness? And then the other just classic, kind of more newer plant book is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer.
I have not yet read that. It's unacceptable that I haven't read that.
It's just magical.
That's what I've heard.
The way she talks about plants and it's also just very like, so this, we also have like, your daughter's asked you to ID a tree and you like feel so bad that you don't know the tree. I think there's so much about plant education and something that plant nerds have done where it's like, oh, you don't know that tree? Like, how dare you? Well, I know this plant. Do you know this plant? I know this plant. You don't know this plant? And that's something I think we need to really get rid of. All people are good with plants. We eat plants a lot. We have an innate knack to know plants. Yeah, some people are better at learning Latin names than others. But really, this is something as humans, this is like our human heritage is having a connection with plants. And we've done it all over the world forever. One of my favorite things when we're giving propagation classes on native plants is I'll be like giving a tour and there will just be someone in the back going, just unsolicited, will say, oh my God, I can't grow a plant. I have I don't have a green thumb. I can't do it. I'm horrible at it. And for years I was like, what is up with this rando always in the back, someone like feeling bad about killing plants. And then I realized like, oh my God, this person or these people, this type of person once killed like a houseplant or tried to grow some corn and it didn't make it. And they still feel so bad. Like it just really hurt them, that they killed this plant. And that's something else I tell people all the time is like, you're not drowning puppies. You're not like, I don't know, beating kittens over the head. Like they're plants. They die, they live. I've killed so many plants accidentally. And you just keep doing it because their goal is to grow. You learn every time. If you want to make it scientific, write it down. Write down how you killed them. Oh, you forgot to water it? Write it down. Oh, you watered it too much? Write it down. And then, that's just how it goes and how you learn. And it's okay. They're plants. They want help growing, but they don't take it personally. It's not the same. They're on a different timeline. They have different goals.
I like that. I needed that advice. One time in college, I killed a cactus, which takes a special type of neglect to kill a cactus.
Not necessarily. A lot of people overwater their cactus.
Well, you're making me feel better. Okay. All right, good.
Yeah.
So next to the last question is the people that listen to this podcast, they love the West. And I feel like I end up focusing a lot more on kind of the northern end of the country. I talked to a lot of folks from Montana. And while I have spoken to a good number of folks from Arizona, I think the proportion is less. So I feel like you bring this really, really unique perspective that me and a lot of the listeners, really value. So do you have any kind of parting words or something you'd like to ask of the listeners? Any way to kind of wrap it up?
Specifically from Arizona, I'd say go across the border. You should check out the Borderlands. There's so much hype and so much bad press coming out of this area that is both really media driven and really politically driven. It's way safer than like going to downtown Chicago or something.
Sure.
Like it's just, it's just a part of the world. Crossing over the border is amazing. The fact that you can just do it and really feel like from one line to the other, you really are in a different country. And it just feels that way immediately. It's such a cool experience. I highly recommend it. I also highly recommend learning about all these cool Mexican projects because there are so many really cool projects that I want to be supported and honed, like the Colectivo Sonora Silvestre, but like so many that are happening in the region. And I'm learning about more that are happening like in, south of Texas and in Monterrey. And it's so, so, so cool, all of that's happening. But I would say like wherever you live, learn a new butterfly that lives in your region. Yep. Learn like a new native plant. That's something that's just good for you, good for your soul, good for the environment. You don't have to like learn them all. Just learn like one new one and it's helpful. And then in terms of, being in the Borderlands, like at some point check it out or read about it a little more. But it is just these lines, like humans made these lines. And we have like these different societies on one side of a line from the other. It's really wild. You can't get too depressed about it, but it's certainly like just incredible.
It is
that
wild.
Magnitude. Yeah.
It is wild when you really think about it, and it's all just kind of made up, and we all kind of believe it. It is wild. It kind of makes my head kind of explode. So I know people are going to want to support your work and they're going to want to learn more about it. Where should they go on the internet to find more and support?
Go to borderlandsrestoration.org. We do have a great website that we've developed and put a lot of effort into telling all the different stories. I also highly recommend, you can also find like our Mexican partners through there, links to their websites. Smaller orgs have a harder time putting energy into website building, which I totally understand. And so we try and tell some of those stories. Another great group to check out is Bat Conservation International. They're a global organization. They do an amazing amount of work for bat advocacy. I never knew anything about bats. I'm now super into them and love bat factoids every time I learn more. So yeah, those are great, easy websites to learn about the work.
Man, this was so great, Francesca. I'm a super fan of you and all the work you're doing. Thank you for taking the time, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, this was a blast. Thank you so much.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.